welcome to the show today, Mr. Tim Goeglein, and it's a real honor to have him on Entrepreneurs, Business, and Finance. Hello, Tim.
It's great to be with you, Henry. Thanks for welcoming me onto the program.
And before we talk about, um, there's a lot of great things that we want to talk about because Tim is an author, he's a speaker, he's always been involved, well, for a very long time anyway, with the highest levels of government in Washington, D.C., which is where he is at now, on a rare casual day at home. And my father was passed away now, was also in Washington, D.C. That's where I grew up in Arlington, Virginia. And Tim hasn't heard this story, but you were at the George W. Bush White House, and my dad and you had, I guess we'll call it business relationship, and became friends. And he had to retire, and he got dementia, and you continued to have lunch with him. And eventually, he really couldn't go to lunch without someone going with him, so I went with him. Then my mom went because my dad couldn't go, and then we started going. But before all that, and we become, I consider, great friends.
Yes.
But while that was going on, my mom said to me, because there are a lot of things in DC that are about who you know, connections, being at the right place, and that's how it works. And if you're a salesperson, you got to go where someone wants to buy. So there's a practical part of that, and that's a good thing because that's the way people get things done. Um, but I asked my mom. My mom said to me, I'm not quite sure why Tim Goeglein is still having lunch with your father. Your father is retired. He's not very with it anymore. He really can't help Tim. I just am sure because I've gotten to know Tim and they know your wife and your kids. He is just a really genuinely nice person. And that's why he's having lunch with your father. And they continued down to me. And at one point you told me, and I never brought that up, but at one point you told to me, you said, my father was I believe you said, my best friend. And I really admired your father. And so I just decided to keep it on going. And yeah, so I
I,
just think that
I love
says
that.
all about your character right there.
Wow. I guess I could say, like Jack Parr used to do, thank you and good night. I think I'll be levitating for the next 6 months on that story. Uh, I think I'm honor bound to say one important thing, which is that your parents were great friends, and it's such a rarity. You're right, in Washington, where it begins in business and then it either graduates to nothing, or it graduates to authentic friendship. And ours was an authentic friendship. And you want to say that a friendship can only live and breathe as long as the other, in this instance, your father, is somehow physically or mentally 100% fit. And this is not a theory, it's just a fact that that's really not what friendship should ever be based on. It's just that you enjoy that person's company. And one of my favorite writers, C.S. Lewis, who I have quoted a lot, he famously said, Henry, that an authentic friendship begins when you say, "What? You too? I thought I was the only one." And that was the moment where your father's and eventually mother's and now yours and my friendship began, where you just have this chemistry that you can't replicate with any other person, and you realize that you're not the only one.
Wow, what a great story. So I don't have that many people on the show that have Wikipedia accounts.
Mm.
So you could actually look Tim up, as I said, because he's been and still is in contact with the highest powers of the government in our country. Um, and so why don't you start out telling us a little bit about growing up in Indiana? You majored in political science, so you must have always had an interest. You interned very early for congressman and senator, and to this day, you're involved now for a nonprofit business, or you're employed vice president, I believe. You'll speak to that, but for a nonprofit business, and but you're still involved in legislative affairs um, um, as your role and focus on family. which is an interesting mix because Focus on Family, we can talk about this later as well, but is a nonpartisan organization. If I could sum it up, I'd sum it up, it's all about love.
Mm.
Um, I don't think I saw that on the website. I'm sure love is on there, but it's family, supporting people, um, supporting marriages, helping people, and it's a organization of faith. But still, there's a role because the government is so influential in our society that they need someone like you that knows how Washington works that can help. But let's go back to the beginning because you didn't start out at the White House. You started out like any other school kid. Um,
I started what I lovingly call the center of the universe, Fort Wayne, Indiana. We're all from somewhere. I loved and love where I'm from. I was born and raised, in a very happy home, which means, Henry, that for all of my writing, I'll never be a great novelist because I grew up in a happy home. And my parents married for love. And I must tell you, as with you, I hit the lottery in the parents department. My parents were both born in 1937. My mother is deceased. My father, as you said earlier, is my best friend and still very much alive and with us and in good health. Um, but we had a small family business, and I consider it one of the great honors and privileges of life to have been raised in a family business. And so I had a very wonderful upbringing. And I was always, from the youngest of ages, interested in a combination of what I would call people, politics, and the press. And I knew that I wanted to be in journalism. Journalism was always the first love. And I went to Indiana University in Bloomington to the very well known, highly regarded Ernie Pyle School of Journalism, named for the greatest correspondent of World War II, also a native of my home state. So I had a great experience there. And lo and behold, Providence eventually clears his throat in all of our lives. And the direction you think you're going turns out not to be the direction you're going. And I received a telephone call almost out of the blue from a friend of a friend saying, "Why don't you apply for an internship in the office of Senator Dan Quayle?" And at that point, Dan Quayle was a new senator and the youngest U.S. senator from Indiana. And I did apply, and lo and behold, got the internship. And that was really my first summer in Washington. And I had an extraordinary experience. I met young people from all over the country and over the world. But above all, Henry, I met people from different parts of our own country that I had never thought of. I never knew what the Mississippi Delta was. I didn't know people from the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I remember befriending a woman who had grown up actually in a neighboring state of mine, and the description of her upbringing was completely and entirely different from the experience I had. And I learned in that summer to love the geographical diversity of our country, the people, the personalities, and so forth. And the next summer, I interned again, that summer in Washington, in the House of Representatives for an even more obscure Dan Coates. So the first summer for Dan Quayle in the Senate, the second summer for Dan Coates in the House. And I also interned at NBC News in Washington on the weekends. So I had a wonderful summer, graduated from IU, became a television news producer, and lo and behold, I was there less than a year. Dan Quayle became the Vice President of the United States. Dan Coates became the new appointed U.S. Senator from Indiana. And Dan Coates asked me to come back to be his deputy press secretary, then press secretary. And I ended up staying in the Senate for 10 years, which these days is almost unheard of. The average lifespan of a staffer, a senior staffer in the Senate tends to be, 18 months or a couple of years. So I was there for about 5,000 dog years. And last story, I was with Dan Coates until he left the Senate after a decade. He kept his promise and term limited himself, how rare in Washington. And I was offered a wonderful job in a foundation. And I thought, I'm done with politics. And Dan, who's a great friend still, he said, I don't normally speak like this, Tim, but you're making a big mistake. You've worked this long at this end of Constitution Avenue. Have you ever thought about joining a presidential campaign? And I took his advice. I joined a presidential campaign, and it was a small and nascent one. It didn't go much, didn't go anywhere after the New Hampshire primary. But I received another telephone call, and this one from Governor George W. Bush's office, and I was offered a wonderful job in the Bush for President campaign. My wife and I, our two wonderful sons, moved to Austin. 36 days in Florida during Bush v. Gore when nobody won, and then George W. Bush won. And a person I'd only met twice, Karl Rove, offered me a position in behalf of George W. Bush as a special assistant to the President of the United States. That's where I met your great dad and your great mom. I was there for almost 8 years at the White House. And then from there, as you said, for the last 16, as one of the vice presidents at Focus on the Family, all in Washington, which I think these days is particularly unusual. So, in sum, that's me from boyhood until 3 seconds ago. And it's been a rather interesting and privileged, and I say that with humility, wonderful life.
I was looking to the side because I wanted to read this quote on Wikipedia. And one of the power brokers in Washington, D.C. said, if I have a message that I want to get to Rove or the administration, talking about the George W. administration, I scribble out a note to Tim, and within 24 hours, I have a response back. So that is that is an interesting place in history.
I give you, I'm a very serious Christian, so I really give all the thanks to God because, as I say, you just can't plan this. I've had every failure it's possible to have in life. We could do another 14 programs on all my failures. And I've had a few successes, and I must tell you, the failures are really my fault. I own them. And the successes I really attribute to God and to my extraordinary wife and these remarkable mentors. But one of the real blessings of my life was to be hired by Karl Rove to be the deputy director of one of the offices at the White House, and only because of a great friendship and trust between Karl and me in those years did he give me entree to President George W. Bush. And I promise you, Henry, then and now, I did not take that lightly or for granted. And it is unusual. I don't know what percentage of people, even in politics, ever work at the White House, much less for as long as I was privileged to do. But I will tell you again with categorical humility that one of the great privileges was having that kind of ability to interact with President Bush, to be able to help shape and form some of what that presidency did, mostly on the domestic front. I was the president's chief point of contact for all of my fellow people in the faith community, my fellow conservatives, the veteran service organizations, a lot of the cultural institutions. And my primary job, to your wonderful quote, my primary job was to make sure that I was accurately reflecting, among influential groups and institutions, the policy of the president. And I had a second related job, and that was to make sure that I was feeding into the White House bloodstream with pinpoint accuracy what those groups and individuals and institutions believed about those policies. And I think that is a very healthy way to navigate, the building of a presidency and the governing of a nation. And you realize, and I've written about this, but you realize that you are bigger than yourself. You're part of something bigger than yourself. And I think that in healthy White Houses and in a healthy politics, It's good for people who find themselves on either side of the political aisle.
You also told a story, so we'll get to this, but you are a published author, 4 books so far, one coming, maybe more than four, but in the past, I don't know, but four more recent ones. And you speak around to a lot of universities, a lot of students, different locations. And you gave a speech here in Dallas, which you invited me to come, and I learned something that I didn't know. But my dad, from you about my dad, he passed away by that point, but he used to lecture, he lectured with Justice Rehnquist
Yes.
to students one summer, and he did that with Justice Scalia for, I think, 20 years. And so he was the one, he was with Justice Rehnquist because they were good friends just as he died or shortly before. And he let the White House know, and he let the White House know because he called you.
I must tell you, that is truly, authentically one of the most memorable nights of my life. In fact, if I live to be 1,000, I'll never forget it because we were getting ready to go to bed. It was a little after 10 o'clock, and our home phone rang. And that's typically a thing that, doesn't connote like the happiest news in the world. And it was your father. And he was by nature incredibly lawyerly, which I loved about him, formal by nature. And then when you got to know him, a very warm hearted person who thought very deeply about the most important things. And he had a real gift for friendship. And one of his friends was the Chief Justice of the United States, Bill Rehnquist. And so your father phoned me at home and said, I wanted to let you know right away that Chief Justice Rehnquist has died. And I wanted to let you know as a courtesy because the ramifications and the implications, uh, using your father's words, of Bill's death will be enormous. And I won't go into all the details, but even though Justice Rehnquist was unfortunately suffering from cancer, there had been an earlier change in the Supreme Court, so we were already dealing with that, and I was really astonished. And I thanked your father profusely. I called a very trusted ally at the White House to let him know, who let me know that he would let the president of the United States know. And, everything I'm describing took about 15 minutes. And my phone rang a few minutes later. And it was my friend in the White House saying, now, wait a minute. He said, I just let the leader of the free world know that the Chief Justice of the United States of America has died. Um, are we certain about all this? And I said, I'm absolutely certain. I've heard from a source that is the most reliable person I can possibly think of. My trust and respect for this particular source is A plus. And he said to me, preliminarily, Goeglein, you better be right. What is this man's cell phone? Let me call him. And I thought, I don't think that Marion Harrison probably has a cell
That's
phone,
another
or
story. Yeah.
or if he does, not being a high IT tech man, he may not have it with him on a night like tonight. And so we waited and waited for an official announcement. It finally came. But of course, it was a reminder that the reliance of this kind of information and sources really matters. But it is absolutely true that for all of the tectonic changes at the United States Supreme Court, your father definitively was a very important source on one of the most consequential transitions of the Bush years. And I think we know now that one of the chief's own law clerks, present Chief Justice John Roberts, eventually succeeded his boss. But there would be many turns and twists in Supreme Court nominations, including three alone during the Bush years. So it was not an inconsequential thing the way that we learned and conveyed and let the president know.
Well, would you like to share in more elaborate words, perhaps, than I did, the mission of Focus on Family and then your role um, working
Yes.
with government, I guess?
I'd love to. In the height of the moral and social revolution of the 1970s, it was increasingly becoming a form of bad manners to say that marriage is a really good thing, that parenting is a really good thing, that having children is a really good thing, that divorce hurts children, that growing up with only a father or only a mother, is not optimal. That it's okay to discipline your children. And this kind of view, it seems now completely certified by all the empirical research. I mean, literally, there's not a single major study that negates the importance of little people growing up in an intact, functional family. But in the 70s, we saw, things that we hadn't seen before in the United States. And into this maelstrom stepped a very well-known child psychologist, Dr. James Dobson. And he decided to found a ministry that would really seek to support marriage, family, parenting, human life, religious liberty, the conscience of sovereignty, parental rights, this kind of thing. And he started a focus on the family, started in Southern California. He was a native Californian, now located in Colorado Springs. And it has grown exponentially. It's become a remarkably consequential, influential ministry, not only to people of faith, but also to people of no faith or people who are seeking. But when people, because of the advent of social media and a very well listened to daily radio broadcast, when people are seeking help, no matter where they find themselves, a child has tragically committed suicide, a spouse left in the middle of the night, a foster or orphan care or adoption situation, which seems impossible, fentanyl, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, all of the things that impact marriage, family, and parenting. Focus on the family very often is one of the very first places that people who are finding themselves in trouble call. And really, we've been just, by the gift of providence, as I say, been able to help countless millions of people through a nearly 50-year effort. We also have a modest operation in Washington on public policy. We have a global footprint. We have a substantial presence, in over 100 countries worldwide. So it's really comprehensively a ministry that seeks to serve and to help the least, the last, and the lost. But also, and this is important to say, Henry, also for healthy marriages, healthy parenting, for the opposite of what I've said, it's also a wonderful one-stop shop. It's a wonderful resource of information to support family, and so it's beautiful and a blessing to be a part of this ministry across all of these years.
And what about the legislative affairs? Because I know when I'm there and we get together, you're frequently off to meet someone on the Hill. For those of you that haven't actually been to Washington or thought about it, the Capitol is literally on a hill, hence the jargon. So you're meeting with
Yes,
staffers, you're meeting with congressmen, you're meeting with senators, and you're trying to perhaps encourage some of these values that
yes.
Focus Family is determined to help.
I love the way you said it. If I had a bumper sticker, Henry, it would have two words: relationships matter, and they do. Washington is a city of relationships. And so, as Focus's eyes and ears in Washington, as our ambassador, to the most powerful city in the world, it's very important that I have relationships with senators and with members of the House. It's very important that I'm in the think tanks, the public policy groups, that I'm interacting with senior staff and, frankly, not senior staff, but people, who help, run public policy in the United States. I love how you use the phrase "on the Hill" because one of the things that people learn when they come to Washington, they visit their congressman or woman, they visit their senator, or they go into the public places, and what they learn very quickly is that much of our government is being run by 20-year-olds, and they're always dazzled. And I think it's a great thing that they learn it's a youthful city. There's a lot going on. So one of my roles as the vice president of government and external relations at Focus on the Family is to build a lot of bridges, to build bridges with people who agree with us and to build bridges with people who do not agree with us. And I must tell you, I'm a people person. So I'm very comfortable in the presence of someone who does not share the kind of comprehensive worldview of Focus on the Family. And I'm very comfortable in the presence of people who do. I have, friends of all ideological sorts, and I have lots of friends who are really, frankly, not ideological at all. It's amazing that in a polarized, incredibly hyper polarized time, Henry, Washington still is filled with a lot of excellent people who are actually more pragmatic by nature. They want to ask, what are the practical implications of policy? If we're going to enact a policy that's going to impact millions and millions of people, before we do that, why don't we have a discussion about what real people, beyond the Beltway actually think? And so I do everything I can to accurately reflect what we at Focus on the Family view, whether you're in a red state or in a blue state. And I'm pleased to say that these relationships are regularly nourished and kept in top form so that when it does come to the discussion phase about what may happen, that we can do our best to try to leverage it for something good.
That is inspiring, and that's actually how you met my father because he was president of a think tank, and he actually had a very practical. I remember you sharing this, and I knew this growing up. His specialty was administrative law, so how the federal
Yes.
government is administrated, and he had his pulse on what was going to happen in the practical world of politics as opposed to what people
Mm.
wanted to happen, said was going to happen. And you said he was a good source for that.
I believe that politics at its best is the art of the possible. Democracy at any level is not a spectator sport. You have to be engaged. And one of the things that I think is the best of Washington was really embodied in your father, and it's the following. He was a very smart leader, but he also had spent professional years working on Capitol Hill. He knew how the process worked. He knew the combination of personalities, politics, and good and bad policymaking. He had seen it all. Uh, you know, uh, Through his life, he got to know people who were both insiders, people who made policy, and he got to know people who were outsiders. Maybe they weren't the powerful people who had been elected or nominated and confirmed to something, but they were influential. They were people who the powerful people, so called, picked up the phone and said, "What do you think?" or "Come into the office. I'd like to have your view or perspective." There was one particularly very, very influential conservative figure in Washington. In fact, I would argue that in all of the history of American conservatism, this particular individual I'm thinking of was not only close to your father, but told me was the single most important figure in this man's orbit, your father, and that he relied on your father's experience, his insight, his wisdom, and his sense about what was possible. And I think that this kind of practical sense is a real gift to be able to speak to an influential person or a powerful person and to say, that might be the ideal, that might be what you want to do, but here are the 3 or 4 practical ramifications of either getting there eventually, or maybe thinking otherwise that this is not perhaps the best time or the right thing to do. And I think, frankly, I'm not overstating it, but I think we're missing those kind of people more than ever. Because in an era, as I said earlier, of hyper polarization, I think too often people shoot from the proverbial hip. They think less about the practical ramifications and they think more about how we can get on TV tonight or how we can garner a headline or get into social media. And by the way, we need all those things. It's part of the American experience. But I think far more important, and especially for what I do at Focus on the Family, is this good for real people in real situations who are really dealing already with a lot in their personal lives?
That is terrific to hear you say. And I would like to read a few of the books that you've written. The most recent one is A Perfect Union. There's longer titles, but that's the main part of the title. American Restoration, Stumbling Towards Utopia. And you have a new one coming out. Would you like to talk about as we wrap up? I know you've got to go back
Yeah,
downtown. You
yes,
often
I'd
wear
be
a bow
happy.
tie. I'm picturing you with your bow tie back on soon. Talk about the Perfect Union or your newest book or anything else you'd like to talk about to wrap
I,
up.
you bet I'd be happy to. In order, the first book was Man in the Middle: Faith and Politics in the George W. Bush Era. It was a memoir of the Bush years, particularly the centrality and importance of faith and public life in those years, and why the Bush presidency, for all of the revision and discussions, in my view, it's very important to not miss the centrality of the president's faith and how that faith really impacted domestic, foreign, and security policy. And it's the differentiation of the book. And it's one of the things that I wanted to cover. And I think even now, it's often a major part of the Bush Cheney years that is almost always forgotten. The second book, as you say, Henry, is called American Restoration. I'm a bottomless optimist. I really am, and an incorrigible optimist. And it's not because I just get up every day and gosh, confetti to the wind. I really believe in the United States of America. I believe that our country and culture is going through a very, very difficult time, and I don't make light of that. But I do believe that restoration and renewal is possible. And I wanted to outline in a book, not from some fancy talking points. Boy, it's always going to be better tomorrow. No, I wanted to actually, and I didn't want to do a book. Kind of here's the 15-point plan. You know, it's not a cookbook. What I wanted to do is to give some historic sense of other polarizing eras and how America came through those, and often as a much better and stronger country. And I believe that it is possible that we will have a period of restoration and renewal. And so I wanted to write about that. The third book is called Toward a More Perfect Union: The Moral and Cultural Case for Teaching the Great American Story. And I wrote this book before the era of cancel culture and erasure culture and all of that. But it's a book that defends understanding the timeline of American history and what are the ramifications for the kind of historic and cultural illiteracy that we see too often in our country. And I close the book by again offering some very practical ways that we can increase historic literacy with the rising generation of young people. I think that it's very important because historic and cultural amnesia, I think, is very dangerous for the free society. And as you say, in September, the fourth book is called Stumbling Toward Utopia. And it's a history of the 1960s, but it's more than that. Stumbling Toward Utopia is really about where did all the ideas of the moral and social revolution, resulting in 1968, 69, etc. Where did all those ideas come from? Where were those seeds planted, and why did they germinate at that particular time, resulting in the greatest moral and social revolution I would argue, in American history since the Industrial Revolution. So that book comes out in September, and I think it's a darn good read. And I think it's a take on the 19. We've heard a lot about the 1960s, but I think this is a particular gloss on where it all came from, and above all, what it means for contemporary American society.
Well, I look forward to reading it. I've read all the books so far. I recommend them to anybody in this country and maybe other countries. And I thank you very much for coming on the show and for your friendship and for your good work for our country.
It's so kind of you, Henry. I'll tell you, it's a treasured and cherished friendship with you, more than I can put into words. And I'll tell you, it's a great luxury to be able to spend a half an hour or more talking about the great ideas. I know you feel the same way. I really never bet against the United States of America. It's a remarkable and exceptional country, and we have a lot to do. So I say onward. And my great hope is that just over the horizon, is a better time for everybody.
Fantastic. Well, Tim Goeglein, Entrepreneur's Business and Finance, published author with a wonderful history of experience and contribution to this company, to this country, and vice president of a nonprofit business organization. Thank you very much. Focus on Family.
A real pleasure, Henry. Thank you.